As I read it, they polarize out as rounded metal bits.
September the 8th, 1966. NBC aired the promotional photographs for their new science fiction show and quietly airbrushed out the pointed ears and arched eyebrows of one of its lead characters, convinced the resemblance to the devil would drive viewers away before a single episode aired. The network was wrong about almost everything. Spock became the show's most beloved character, a sex symbol with young female viewers, and the center of something no one had planned for. 3 seasons, 79 episodes, a show the network nearly canceled before a single frame was shot, airing into America's living rooms at a moment when the country was burning with the civil rights movement, fighting in Vietnam, and had not yet placed a single human being on the moon. And then, the cameras went dark. Here is what happened after. One of them found his wife face down at the bottom of their backyard pool, and the grief nearly swallowed him whole. One of them smuggled a Jewish childhood prayer onto a futuristic spaceship and, without meaning to, created a hand gesture now recognized by more human beings than any religious symbol on Earth. One of them was told by Martin Luther King Jr. himself that she was not allowed to leave. She listened. And the women she then inspired became the first to carry humanity into orbit. One of them stormed the beaches of Normandy on D-Day, was shot 8 times, and survived because his brother gave him a cigarette case. 2 of them spent their earliest childhoods behind barbed wire, one because of his race, one because of his religion, and both went on to fight battles the world wasn't ready for. Let's see what really happened.
Here and here.
I don't understand.
You will. You're a perfect choice.
William Shatner was born on March 22, 1931, in the Notre Dame de Grace neighborhood of Montreal, Quebec, the son of a Jewish clothing manufacturer who fought to survive the Depression with a business that had no business surviving it. Growing up in a predominantly Catholic neighborhood, Shatner got into enough fistfights over his faith that classmates gave him the nickname Tuffy. He won most of them. He was 35 years old when he became James T. Kirk. Kirk was not simply a hero. He was a particular kind of American dream, male, bold, moral by instinct rather than philosophy. The man who would negotiate with aliens, fight Klingons hand to hand, and still be back in the captain's chair in time for the closing credits. Every man wanted to be him. The show insisted every woman wanted him. He was the argument that confidence alone could carry a person through the universe. Before the show, Shatner was a serious stage actor trained in the classical tradition. He had understudied Christopher Plummer at the Stratford Shakespeare Festival, performed opposite Yul Brynner on Broadway, and appeared in Judgment at Nuremberg alongside Spencer Tracy. Gene Roddenberry did not create Star Trek with Shatner in mind. He got Shatner because the first pilot was scrapped and a new one was ordered, and Shatner said yes. But here's what most people don't know. The moment Star Trek was canceled in 1969, Shatner's wife left him and took most of what they had. Broke, largely unemployable, and too famous to be anonymous and too canceled to be bankable, he spent an extended stretch of the early 1970s living in a pickup truck camper, driving from audition to audition. Captain Kirk sleeping in a parking lot. The comeback came slowly, then all at once. Star Trek the Motion Picture in 1979, The Wrath of Khan in 1982, 6 films total with the original crew, then T.J. Hooker, then Rescue 911, then Boston Legal, where, finally, the acting establishment caught up with what everyone at home had always known. He won 2 Emmy Awards for Boston Legal. 2. His marriages tell a harder story. 4 in total. His third wife, Noreen Kidd, a model he married in 1997, struggled with addiction for years. On August 9, 1999, Shatner returned home to find her at the bottom of their backyard pool. She was 40 years old. The coroner ruled accidental drowning. Shatner has spoken of that night in the oblique language of someone who is still, decades later, processing the unspeakable. On October 13, 2021, at 90 years old, William Shatner became the oldest human being to reach space. Jeff Bezos invited him as a guest aboard Blue Origin's New Shepard rocket. The man who had spent 3 seasons pretending to explore the cosmos looked down at the Earth from 400,000 feet and wept. Not from joy, from grief. "All I saw was death," he wrote in his memoir. "The darkness out there was infinite, and the blueness of Earth was everything." The captain finally made it to space. He did not feel what he expected to feel. Today, in 2026, William Shatner is 95 years old with an estimated net worth of $100 million. He reportedly receives no royalties from the original Star Trek series. Paramount kept everything. Captain Kirk commanded the universe, while the man who played him lived in a truck, then lost his wife to a swimming pool, then wept in space. The character was always in command. The man was always fighting to survive.
But that was a bargain with something that didn't exist. You said you weren't real, remember?
I'm a woman, as real and as human as you are.
Leonard Nimoy as Mr. Spock. Leonard Simon Nimoy was born on March 26, 1931, in the West End of Boston, Massachusetts, to Orthodox Jewish immigrant parents who had fled poverty in Ukraine. They lived in a tenement apartment in one of the poorest neighborhoods in the city. He began acting at 8 years old in a neighborhood theater and dropped out of Boston College after a semester, taking his scholarship and leaving before the year ended. He was 35 years old when he became Spock. Spock was the argument Star Trek was actually making, that logic without compassion is incomplete, and compassion without logic is self-indulgent. A half-human Vulcan who felt everything and showed nothing. Nimoy built the character from the inside out, imbuing each repressed emotion with the weight of something carefully chosen. Viewers fell in love with Spock not because he was cold, but because he wasn't, and they knew it. But here is what most people don't know, and it changes the way you watch every frame Nimoy ever shot. During the filming of the original series, Leonard Nimoy was a severe alcoholic. He wrote in his autobiography that he would arrive home each evening and drink until unconsciousness. He kept away from his co-stars, not to maintain character integrity, as he publicly explained, but because he was in no condition to socialize with anyone. The man who played the most logical being in the galaxy was unraveling, quietly, in his dressing room. He got sober, he got serious, and he left something else behind that most people have never fully traced. In the second season episode Amok Time, when Spock needed a Vulcan greeting for his first encounter with his own people on screen, Nimoy reached back into a memory from his childhood in Boston. He had been sitting in a synagogue as a boy, his father telling him not to look, while the Kohanim, the Jewish priests, spread their hands toward the congregation in an ancient blessing. He peeked. He saw the fingers split into the shape representing the Hebrew letter Shin, the first letter of the word for the Almighty. It seemed, he later wrote, magical. 25 years later, he turned that forbidden childhood glimpse into the Vulcan salute. The hand gesture, now recognized by billions of people on 6 continents, began in a Boston synagogue that a small boy was told not to look at, and looked at anyway. Nimoy quit smoking in 1985, when his daughter told him he could not hold his newborn grandson while still a smoker. He had smoked 2 packs a day for 37 years. The lungs did not recover. In 2013, 2 decades after he quit, he was diagnosed with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. He spent his final year speaking publicly, in interviews, on Twitter, in the language of the character he had built his life around, urging anyone who would listen to stop. His last tweet, 5 days before he died, read, "A life is like a garden. Perfect moments can be had, but not preserved, except in memory. L-L-A-P."
And every time there was a break, they'd say, okay, a 10-minute break, smoke it, they got him. That was the byword. Right? So it was in the culture.
Leonard Nimoy died on February 27, 2015, at 83 years old, from end-stage COPD. Spock could not feel emotion, and spent 50 years making everyone who watched him feel everything. The man who built him felt too much, drank to quiet it, peaked when he was told not to look, and left behind a hand gesture that is, at its origin, a Jewish blessing. A wish for the congregation's long life and prosperity. He did not live long, but he gave that wish to the world. Friends, if that stopped you, that the most iconic hand gesture in science fiction history came from a Jewish boy peeking in a synagogue, hit the like button right now. 60 years of history deserve that moment. Now let's keep going.
How does that Vulcan salute go? That hurts worse than the uniform.
Nichelle Nichols as Lieutenant Nyota Uhura. Grace Dell Nichols, known to the world as Nichelle, was born on December 28, 1932 in Robbins, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago, the daughter of a factory worker who became the town's mayor and chief magistrate. She started performing as a teenager and was touring with Duke Ellington's orchestra before most people her age had finished high school. She was 33 years old when she became Uhura. Uhura was not simply a black character on a television show. In 1966, that distinction alone was revolutionary. The communications officer of the USS Enterprise was a skilled professional, a fourth in command, someone whose competence was assumed rather than questioned. At a time when black women on American television were primarily playing maids and servants, Nichols was sitting at the helm of a starship in the 23rd century, running communications for humanity. But here is the fact that connects this story to a completely different chapter of American history. 1 year into the series, Nichols decided to leave. She was offered a Broadway production. She walked into Gene Roddenberry's office and handed him her resignation. He asked her to take the weekend to reconsider. She agreed, with no intention of reconsidering. That weekend, at an NAACP fundraiser in Los Angeles, a man across the room asked to meet her. He said he was her biggest fan. He was Martin Luther King Jr. She told him she was planning to leave the show. He stopped smiling. He told her she did not understand what she was doing. When we see you, he said, we see ourselves. And we see ourselves as intelligent and beautiful and proud. Star Trek was the only television program he and Coretta allowed their children to watch. She could not leave. She went back to Roddenberry on Monday morning and tore up the resignation. 2 years later, in the November 1968 episode Plato's Stepchildren, Uhura kissed Captain Kirk in what became, in the cultural record, the first interracial kiss ever broadcast on American network television. That episode aired 7 months after the assassination of the man who had told her to stay. After the show ended, Nichols turned her attention to something even more permanent. In the mid-1970s, she criticized NASA publicly for failing to recruit women and minorities. NASA responded by asking her to do the recruiting herself. She started a company called Women in Motion, and for 4 years traveled to universities and military bases and STEM programs, building the astronaut pipeline the agency had never bothered to construct. Among those who applied and were accepted because of her work, Sally Ride, Judith Resnick, Ronald McNair, and Ellison Onizuka. Mae Jemison, the first black woman to travel to space, said directly that she became an astronaut because she had seen Uhura on television and understood for the first time that the future included her. Nichelle Nichols died on July 30, 2022, at 89 years old, of natural causes, in Silver City, New Mexico. She played a character whose name means freedom. She stayed on the show because a man who dedicated his life to the cause of freedom told her she had to. She then went to NASA and made freedom, the freedom to fly, available to people who had been told by every structure around them that it wasn't theirs to claim. The character and the woman were the same story, told in 2 different universes.
I'm so very frightened.
That's the way they want you to feel. Makes them think that they're alive.
I'm thinking of all the times on the Enterprise when I was scared to death. And I would see you so busy at your command. And I would hear your voice from all parts of the ship.
DeForest Kelley as Dr. Leonard Bones McCoy Jackson. DeForest Kelley was born on January 20, 1920, in Atlanta, Georgia, the second son of a Baptist minister who moved the family across the state following the call of the congregation. He sang gospel in his father's church on Sunday mornings before he was old enough to understand the words. He wanted more than anything to become a doctor. His family could not afford the school that would have made him one. He was 46 years old when he became Dr. McCoy. McCoy was Star Trek's conscience, not in the abstract, but in the specific. He was the one who got angry when the logical answer was inhuman. He was the one who stayed in the room with the patient. Where Kirk acted and Spock calculated, McCoy felt, and he refused to apologize for it. Here is a fact that reframes every moment McCoy spent arguing with Spock. Roddenberry first offered DeForest Kelley the role of Spock. In 1964, Kelley turned it down flat. He did not believe a character that suppressed all emotion would give him anywhere to go as an actor. He was right, and he was utterly wrong. Spock became the most beloved character in television history, and Kelley became the most beloved person on the set. Everyone who worked with him across 30 years and 7 films used the same word, kind. After the cancellation of the original series, Kelley found himself typecast and nearly invisible. He made a horror film about giant mutant rabbits, Night of the Lepus, and gradually stepped back from the working actor circuit. Convention appearances kept him financially afloat through the 1970s. When Nimoy, as executive producer, finally arranged for Kelley to be paid $1 million for Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, it was the first time the franchise had paid him anything close to what his contribution deserved. He was married once to Carolyn Marger Dowling, whom he met in 1942 during a play. They exchanged 2 25-cent rings at the ceremony in 1945 and stayed married for 54 years until his death. They had no children. People who knew them used nearly the same words every time. The most loving couple you have ever seen. DeForest Kelley died on June 11, 1999, at 79 years old, from stomach cancer. He was the first of the principal cast to die, and the only one who did not survive into the 21st century. A minister's son who grew up watching his father stay in the room with whoever was suffering, who wanted more than anything to be a doctor and could not afford the school that would have made him one. He became instead the most famous doctor in the galaxy, played to 30 million strangers a week, and then learned, from the letters that kept arriving until the day he died, that the patients had been real all along.
You will not touch me in that manner.
Now, you listen to me, young woman. I'll touch you in any way or manner that my professional judgment indicates.
James Doohan as Montgomery Scotty Scott. James Montgomery Doohan was born on March 3, 1920, in Vancouver, British Columbia, the youngest of 4 children of Irish immigrants. His father was a pharmacist and dentist who was also a severe alcoholic, and Doohan left home at 19 to escape him by enlisting in the Canadian Army. He was 46 years old when he became Scotty. Scotty was the Enterprise's magician, the engineer who bent physics to keep the crew alive. His defining trait was that he always found a way. The accent, the urgency, the absolute conviction that engineering was not a science, but a form of love for the machine you were keeping alive. But here's what most people have forgotten. The most famous Scotsman in television history was not Scottish. He was Canadian, of Irish descent. He chose the accent himself during his audition, trying 7 different voices before telling Gene Roddenberry that if you want a brilliant engineer, you want him to sound like he's from Scotland. The producers loved it, and for the rest of his life, most people who met James Doohan assumed, without asking, that he'd been born in Aberdeen. Before any of that, there was D-Day. On June 6, 1944, Captain James Doohan landed with the Canadian forces on Juno Beach at Normandy. That night, returning to his command post, he was struck by machine gun fire. 8 bullets. 3 hit his hand, 4 hit his legs, 1 hit his chest. It should have killed him. A silver cigarette case his brother had given him, sitting in his breast pocket, caught the bullet. He lost the middle finger of his right hand. For the rest of his filming career, he carefully angled his hand in every shot to hide it. Most fans who watched Scotty work at that engineering console for 3 seasons never noticed it was missing. He married 3 times and had 7 children, including a daughter named Sarah, born in the year 2000, when Doohan was 80 years old. When he received his star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in 2004, astronaut Neil Armstrong, who almost never appeared at public events, showed up and delivered a tribute. From one old engineer to another, Armstrong said, "Thanks, Scotty." James Doohan died on July 20th, 2005, at 85 years old from Alzheimer's disease and pneumonia. A portion of his ashes were sent to space. He stormed a beach where 8 bullets couldn't stop him. A cigarette case from his brother carried him off Normandy. The same body built Scotty inspired a generation of real engineers and was carried to rest in a rocket. The character said he was giving everything the machine had. The man already knew exactly what that cost.
I found this in gunner room. Gunner mirror.
What is it?
Well, it's green.
George Takei as Lieutenant Hikaru Sulu. George Hosato Takei was born on April 20th, 1937 in Los Angeles, California, to Japanese-American parents whose dry cleaning business disappeared when he was 5 years old, not from market forces, but from armed soldiers who arrived at the door with orders. He was 29 years old when he became Sulu. In 1942, following the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States government ordered the forced relocation of Japanese Americans. 5-year-old George Takei, his parents, his brother and sister, were loaded into vehicles and taken first to a converted horse stable at the Santa Anita racetrack. They slept where animals had slept. Then to Camp Rower in the Arkansas swamplands, surrounded by barbed wire and guard towers. Then to Tule Lake in Northern California, a high-security facility for families classified as potentially disloyal to the country that had just taken everything they owned. When the war ended, the Takei family was released with nothing. No home, no business, no savings. They lived on Skid Row in Los Angeles until 1950. But here's where things get interesting. After all of that, Takei became one of the most visible human beings in American public life, not despite his past, but through it. In October 2005, he came out publicly as gay, revealing an 18-year relationship with Brad Altman that he had kept private through all the conventions, all the appearances, all the decades of being a public figure. When same-sex marriage was briefly legalized in California in 2008, Takei and Altman were married. Walter Koenig served as best man. In 2012, he created and starred in Allegiance, a Broadway musical about the Japanese-American internment experience. He poured money he couldn't afford to lose into a production about a chapter of history most Americans preferred not to examine. He told the story he had lived. His aunt and infant cousin, still in Japan during the war, were killed in the bombing of Hiroshima. He has never stopped talking about any of it. Today, in 2026, George Takei is 88 years old, with an estimated net worth of $14 million. He entered a starship in 1966 because the show's creator believed in a future without prejudice. He had just been released from an actual prison camp run by the country whose future he was now representing. The irony of that is not subtle. He chose to stand in it anyway, and then spent the next 60 years making sure no one forgot what the country had done.
I've been dead before. Contact Excelsior. She'll have the coordinates.
I've already got it, sir.
Standing by, Captain Kirk.
Sulu, you realize that by even talking to us, you're violating regulations.
I'm sorry, Captain. Your message is breaking up.
Walter Koenig as Ensign Pavel Chekhov. Walter Marvin Koenig was born on September 14, 1936, in Chicago, Illinois, the son of Russian Jewish immigrants who had fled Soviet Lithuania and shortened the family name from Königsberg to something Americans could pronounce. His father Isidore was investigated by the FBI during the McCarthy era. He was 30 years old when he joined Star Trek in its second season, 1967. Chekhov was the young one, optimistic, occasionally bumbling, wearing a mop-top hairpiece because the producers wanted to attract younger viewers by putting someone on the bridge who looked like Davy Jones of the Monkees. He was cast as one of only 2 people who auditioned. The Russian accent was partly inspired by his own father's difficulty with the letter V. But here is what most people don't know. Koenig was excluded from the animated Star Trek series in the early 1970s, cut from the budget with no personal notification. He found out at a fan convention when another Trekkie told him he wasn't in it. He showed up to the party that had defined his professional life and found out he had been quietly uninvited. He stayed in the franchise anyway, appearing in every original cast film through Star Trek Generations in 1994. He raised 2 children with his wife Judy Leavitt, whom he married in 1965 and who died in 2022. His son Andrew, who played the character Boner on the 80s sitcom Growing Pains, disappeared in February 2010 while visiting friends in Vancouver, British Columbia.
This morning, the desperate search for Andrew Koenig continues. The star of Growing Pains was last seen in Vancouver, and he's been missing now more than a week.
On February the 25th, friends searching Stanley Park found Andrew hanging from a tree. He was 41 years old. Walter Koenig has spent the years since becoming an advocate for mental health awareness. He speaks so others do not have to carry grief in silence. Today, in 2026, Walter Koenig is 89 years old, with an estimated net worth of between $4 and $8 million, a modest figure for a man whose face is known in every country that has ever had a television set. He played the youngest member of the crew, eager, naive, a believer in the mission. The man behind the character carried a father's grief that no amount of optimism could touch. He kept showing up to the conventions anyway. He keeps talking about what happened to his son. That is not nothing.
I think I'm going to get spacesick. This is vodka. Of course, Doctor. The Garden of Eden was just outside Moscow. Close enough to smell them. It's a Russian invention. Could you tell me where the nuclear vessels are? I'm not that green.
I live long enough. I'm going to run out of samples.
The supporting cast. Not everyone on the Enterprise served in every episode. Some served in 7. But these recurring faces gave the ship its texture, the sense that the world of the USS Enterprise existed inside something real. Here's what happened to them. Majel Barrett, Nurse Christine Chappell. Barrett appeared in Star Trek's first unaired pilot as the ship's first officer, a woman commanding the bridge, years before the culture caught up. NBC forced Roddenberry to remove her from the role. He did. Then he married her in a Shinto ceremony in Tokyo in 1969. She became the voice of the Federation's computer across all 6 Star Trek television series, her voice so synonymous with artificial intelligence that when Google was developing its early voice assistant, engineers inside the company codenamed the project Majel. Amazon's Alexa team did the same. Her last voiceover session for the 2009 Star Trek film was recorded 9 days before she died. Majel Barrett Roddenberry died on December 18, 2008, at 76 years old from leukemia. Grace Lee Whitney, Yeoman Janice Rand. Whitney was intended to be a principal character, Kirk's yeoman, a slow burn tension the writers kept teasing. She was fired after 8 episodes. In her 1998 autobiography, she disclosed that she had been sexually assaulted by an unnamed studio executive in the days before her dismissal. She fell into alcoholism and drug addiction for years afterward, disappearing from Hollywood almost entirely. Leonard Nimoy personally brought her back, casting her in Trek 3 and Trek 4 during her recovery. She became a motivational speaker for women in recovery. Grace Lee Whitney died on May 1, 2015, at 85 years old of natural causes in Coarsegold, California.
Starting me.
5 of the 8 principal cast members are gone. DeForest Kelley in 1999, a preacher's son who became the doctor everyone trusted. Leonard Nimoy in 2015, the boy who peeked in synagogue and gave the world a blessing disguised as a Vulcan hand sign. James Doohan in 2005, the D-Day soldier who spent his career hiding a missing finger. Majel Barrett in 2008, the woman the network refused to put in command who ended up speaking for every ship. Nichelle Nichols in 2022, the woman Martin Luther King told to stay, who listened and then went to NASA. The show said the future would be different. It said that by 2266, humanity would have resolved its arguments about who deserves to stand on the bridge. The people who made that argument in 1966 were, themselves, still fighting those arguments off-screen, for the right to be hired, to be protected, to be paid what they were owed, to be who they were without hiding it. Drop a comment. Which story hit you hardest? And here's the real question. Did you know that the Vulcan salute, arguably the most recognizable hand gesture in the history of science fiction, began when a Jewish boy in Boston was told not to look at a religious ceremony and looked anyway? Because once you know that, you can never watch Spock raise his hand without seeing a small child in a synagogue peeking at something his father said was too holy to see. He saw it. He never forgot it. And the next time you return that salute to a stranger at a convention or a fan gathering, you'll know you're not quoting a television show. You're passing on a blessing that has existed for 3,000 years. If this took you back to the bridge of the Enterprise, to those 60-year-old theme notes and the stars streaking at warp, you know what to do.